Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in recognition of the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy's landfall on the Northeast and the destruction that it brought to a ruinous path through Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. And I will be joined today on the floor and ask unanimous consent that we be permitted to engage in a colloquy by my colleagues from New York, Senator Schumer, and from Rhode Island, Senator Whitehouse, if there is no objection.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can scarcely capture in words the awesome, monstrous power of this storm as it hit the Northeast. And as I traveled through it, I was near the coastline of Connecticut, traveling some of the roads in the midst of this storm as it ripped through my state, tearing apart communities along our coast, destroying homes and businesses, displacing families, forever altering the shoreline itself. And anybody who questions the power of nature at its most destructive should have seen this storm as it unfolded and the damage that it left in its wake. In fact, in Connecticut, $770 million in damages. And what I remember from touring Connecticut is not only the size and magnitude of destruction, but also the resilience and strength of Connecticut's people as they struggled through the pain and anguish of coping with this devastation, wondering how they would ever rebuild. And in fact, they have rebuilt with that courage and relentless strength and fortitude that has so marked the character of Connecticut and New England and New York as they rallied around one another and exhibited that sense of optimism and hope, which was as important as any material resources that were brought to bear. They rallied around each other with gratitude and with hope because they had each other, and they have succeeded in clearing the debris, reconstructing, rebuilding in a way that is inspiring. I only wish that Congress's response was as effective and courageous as the citizens of Connecticut that I viewed in the storm's aftermath. The Senate was slow to act, but it was before the House in passing the $60 billion recovery package for the Northeast. And the effort was stalled in the House, quite bluntly, by partisan politics of the worst kind and trivial obstruction. And there are lessons to be learned here. Number one, that partisanship and politics should have no role in our response to disasters, whether in Oklahoma or Colorado or Louisiana or the Northeast. We are all in this effort together when disaster strikes. We should rally around each other as the people of Connecticut rallied. And our response has to be quicker, smarter, stronger than it was in this instance. We owe it, again, to ourselves as well as to people who have suffered financial and emotional loss, and many of them physical injury as a result of this kind of natural disaster. Those two lessons are reinforced by a third, which is these superstorms have become the new normal. We can no longer regard the one-in-a-century storm as one every 100 years. They are coming once every year because climate disruption is, in fact, increasing their frequency and force in a way that is awesome and alarming and astonishing. And so another lesson here is that there has to be preparation to prevent damage, to mitigate the effects of these storms when they strike. And the investments, and they are investments, have to be smart and strong in means such as storm barriers, breakers, better shoreline resilience. Eventually, the federal government provided aid, and Connecticut has put it to good use. The $200 million that were distributed through the National Flood Insurance Plan to homeowners and business owners. Cities and towns around my state have used $42 million in FEMA assistance, and more than $10 million have gone to health services and facilities. And as our governor announced just yesterday, an additional $65 million have been granted to the state to supplement the initial $72 million from the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the form of community development block grants for disaster relief. These new federal dollars are critical to the effort of rebuilding, and I will continue to fight not only for additional funds, but also against the bureaucratic log jams and red tape that have prevented so many from receiving more timely aid. This aid has come too slow, it has been too small, and it has been behind the efforts in time and strength of Connecticut's people. And I will continue to fight for increased aid, including from the $100 million that was announced yesterday and today's announcement of the U.S. Department of Interior of $100 million in the coastline resiliency projects. I will support all qualified applicants from Connecticut securing some of this competitive funding, and we will fight for a fair allocation of this money to benefit the important work that Connecticut is doing to strengthen our coastline so that we will prevent and reduce the effects of these storms in the future. I had the privilege to travel the state as the leader of a listening tour for the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force this past May, just over the half-year mark from the time that Sandy hit. The progress made with this help from the federal government, combined with the goodwill, drive, and sense of responsibility toward one another exemplified by the people of Connecticut, has been remarkable. But we must resolve to do better at the federal level. And I hope that not only the storm itself, but the shortcomings of the relief effort will be a teaching moment for the nation. Because the evidence is irrefutable that climate disruption is impacting our oceans and atmosphere and leading to an increasing number of severe weather storms, events across the country that we cannot control. And we will see more such monstrous storms here and in other parts of the country. I want to thank my colleagues, many of us like Senator Whitehouse and Senator Schumer, who have been such strong and steadfast leaders in this effort to recognize the effects of climate disruption and prepare for them. Connecticut is in the process of upgrading our infrastructure to strengthen our resiliency among the most vulnerable communities. We're investing in microgrids, often powered by hydrogen fuel cells that are manufactured in our state to provide backup power for hospitals and senior communities in towns like Preston and Franklin, which I visited in the aftermath of the storm. In Milford, residents are using HUD funding to elevate their homes and guard against these kinds of storm surges. And in other coastal towns, green infrastructure is being employed with marsh grass to slow surging waters during storms. In Stamford, Connecticut, my hometown, the city is using federal aid to upgrade a 17-foot hurricane barrier by replacing manual pumps to insure against damage to the city's communities in future storms. I visited the shoreline of Stamford, as I did up and down the coast of Connecticut, and I have since, to see how Connecticut is learning these lessons to reduce dollar costs as well as human costs. These improvements taking place across Connecticut speak volumes to our strength of will and mind and the determined character of our people in Connecticut. And I express appreciation to colleagues like Senator Schumer and White House and others in this body who helped us in a time of need, came forth to provide encouragement and support and to assure that the people of Connecticut are not alone. No one in the United States struck by natural disaster, whether it is in the presiding officer's state of West Virginia or in the westernmost part of Hawaii, should be alone in times of natural disaster. That is what we do together. We come together, we rally together. And I thank the President, and I yield the floor.